Hello, this is Colin Liddell, and this is the Shortpod, a brief and succinct podcast commenting on the issues and events of the day. And today it is the 22nd of February 2020. Now, today I want to talk about one of the central myths, one of the mainstay lies of the alt-right, the idea of cultural Marxism. According to the orthodoxy of the alt-right, Marxism was a failure in economic terms, so in order to achieve its sinister goals, it turned to the ideas of Antonio Gramsci, and they decided to march to power through the institutions and by changing the culture of Western societies. This is a perfect alt-right kind of mimetic idea, because to the uninformed, low-information person that it is directed at, it sounds plausible and it also sounds revelatory. So like, oh, here is somebody revealing to me the secrets of what's really going on. So that has a very kind of compelling hook and hold on people. But of course, like a lot of alt-right myths, when you examine it more closely and directly, it falls apart. It doesn't really stand up to critical analysis. Now, often when you hear alt-righters talk about cultural Marxism, they will repeat the alt-right maxim that politics is downstream from culture. Now, note here the use of two ill-defined terms, politics and culture, in a loose cause and effect relationship. Then once the alt-righters have kind of got your attention, what they do is they then link that back to a load of unreadable books written by some overeducated and at the time completely ignored German Jewish intellectuals. Now, this is the key point for the alt-right. They want to tie in everything you don't like with malevolent Jewish influence. Now, yes, it's a very compelling and even convincing theory on a very low intellectual level, but you can also ask, did the exact same thing happen with the late Roman Empire or the fall of Babylon? Probably not. But what exactly do they mean by the term cultural Marxism? What does it refer to? Usually it is used to refer to things like toxic individualism, sexual liberation, the breakdown of the family, gay and transgender nonsense, white self-loathing, etc., etc. And these are all real things that we see around us in the world today. However, I have never seen anyone anywhere prove a causal link between something Adorno or Marcuse wrote and some gender-confused person having a sex change. The next absurdity that the alt-right believes in is that they can actually pull off exactly the same trick, i.e., march to power through the institutions and changing the culture of society. Here, have a listen. This is Grinder Greg Johnson and Marcus Folan, the golden one, having a cozy little chat about how the impoverished, deplatformed, and ghettoized alt-right is going to pull off the same trick by climbing up the metapolitical river and presumably pissing in it.
And really, if you don't get the metapolitical foundations right, you're just sort of LARPing, you're play acting. Like you're engaged in politics, but you don't actually have the basis for engaging in politics. It's sort of like pretending that the stick that you're waving around is actually a sword because you haven't provided yourself with a sword yet.
Yeah, exactly. And a very good example of this is the Swedish political system. We never had a cultural Marxist party that got 50% of the votes, but as it is right now, they won the battle of ideas during the late 60s, 70s, 80s, and they took over academia, culture. They won in every non-political arena. They won, and now we have all of the political parties basically are heavily influenced by their ideas. So as it is right now, a few years ago, I came to the conclusion that the most I can do is not necessarily purely political, but rather getting ideas out there, and they can in turn influence how people will act in in 10 years, for example.
Wow, these people are obvious jokes. What I notice, however, is they're trying very, very hard to sound affirmative and hopeful in order to keep their tiny trickle of donations flowing in. Hope they spend it all on massive alt-right blockbuster movies and giant media corporations to brainwash the normies. My advice is take a wait-and-see approach. Don't throw money at them straight away. So, if a bunch of exiled Jewish intellectuals are not responsible for all the freaks and weirdos we see around us today, what is? The answer is simply freedom. Living, as I do, in Japan, you see exactly the same thing, although with a somewhat different cultural spin. And Japan has never been Jewed or particularly deferential to the writings of the Frankfurt School. Probably lost in translation, I should think, and quite rightly so. Yes, freedom, especially freedom for women, leads to careers, delayed marriage, plummeting birth rates, etc., etc., which then becomes a pull factor for mass immigration, multiculturalism, and attempts to suppress the ethnicity of the host societies. Contrary to other myths spread by the alt-right, Japan is not an ethno-state, and the economy is gearing up to bring in more immigrants and to deal with the resultant upsurge in so-called hate speech that creates. Likewise, individualism obviously and inextricably leads to the small minority of gender-confused people expressing themselves in the weird ways that we now see. The causation here is clear and simple. There is nothing obtuse or arcane here. But what sinister forces are behind all this evil freedom? It must be the Jews, right? Actually, no. It's what normies basically have wanted since the year dot, and finally got as we evolved post-Malthusian economies and societies with mass democracy, topped off by a few medical discoveries like the contraceptive pill. Low birth rates, the true degeneracy of the West, is not driven by culture. It is driven by women being women freed from the culture of the past. In short, what we are witnessing here is not cultural Marxism, it is cultural anarchism. So, what should be the response to this deeply self-destructive situation? It's pretty obvious, isn't it? Quite simply, we need to end the cultural anarchy by imposing an affirmative culture that limits individual freedom, and especially female freedom, to the point where the demographics of society are no longer those of a death camp forced to suck in replacement population after replacement population. Anyway, I hope that gave you something to think about and a few clues about the nonsense constantly being pushed by the extremely pointless and unsuccessful alternative right. Over and out.